Hi, Teresa. Welcome to the show.
Hello, John. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. I've got two of your book covers right up here, Lost Seeds, The Beginning, and the other one is Lost Seeds, The Legacy. Those are your two books we'll be talking about today.
That's right.
Okay. Before we do that, though, I like to know a little bit more about the person I'm talking to. Like where do you live and what's your background and how you got to the point where you thought, I'm going to write a book or two.
Sure, sure. Well, that's a lot. So maybe we can go back and forth a little bit so I'm
Sure,
not
sure.
talking so
Of
much.
course.
But I live in Nashville, Tennessee. But I'm a northern girl, Midwest, for most of my life. I lived in Michigan. Most of my formative years were there, and my children were born there. So I consider myself a Michigander, but I've been in here in Tennessee for the past 6 years. And I am, some would call me retired, some would say I'm really not, but I do a number of things. I teach at two different universities at their law schools. I'm at Vanderbilt Law School and Michigan's Law School. And I'm a retired executive, a corporate executive. And and I also have a business. But now I threw writing books in there. So that's a little bit about who I am, John.
Okay. So, your background, some people tell me that, oh, I've always been writing. I wrote poetry, short stories as a teenager, and here I am. I'm in my 50s or even later, and I obviously write books now. But did you have that kind of goal? Did you write things when you were younger and just led to that?
I never considered myself a writer. I always felt there was a book inside, but there wasn't a big burning desire. I enjoyed what I was doing, being a lawyer, and doing those in business, so doing those kinds of things. And as I grew up, my parents exposed us a lot to the arts, whether it was music, whether it was plays, theater.
Hmm.
My mother made sure we read a lot of books, took us to the library when libraries were popular.
Of course.
Um, I've always enjoyed reading. When I was in high school, I would take literature classes, same thing in college. So reading was always thing I enjoyed because it helped me escape. And I think art in and of itself is a great way to escape and do something different. And it gets my mind off of the analytical business stuff that I'm doing. So it wasn't until I retired from the corporate world, the full-time corporate world, that I said, there's that book in me. And I had friends that told me, you need to sit down and write a book because I enjoyed kind of making up stories, whether it's for my children, my grandchildren, my granddaughter. I love making up jingles for her. And
Nice.
so I one day I was sitting out on my patio, John, and this story just kind of rained down in my head, and I started making notes, and from there, Lost Seeds bloomed. And it was kind of like the characters just said, "It's time, we're going to start talking to you, and here's our story."
Characters talking to you.
Yeah.
I know that feeling. It happened to me, and many people I talk to here who write fiction say the same thing. Isn't that interesting? So did you
Yeah.
start with an outline?
I did, John. Because there was just so much, first of all, that was coming into my head. And I really had to make sure that it made sense and it was complete.
Yep,
So once I had an outline, and of course, your outline tends to vary as you really develop the story, correct?
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So, I started writing and it just flowed. And finally, when I felt that I had a good first manuscript, then I sent it to an editor to help me. You need someone objective,
Yes.
to read it and make sure, because sometimes what's in your head, you're kind of gap filling, from what actually lands on the paper. So I just needed to make sure that there weren't, those gaps. So
Yeah,
I had a very
for
good
sure.
editor. I had some beta readers,
Okay.
people
Yeah.
that I have a good friend. She's a lifelong reader. I've never known her without a book in her hands or on her tablet. And so she read the story and a couple of other folks. And so that's kind of how it came together. And every time I wrote a chapter, I would read the chapter to my dad because he was born during part of that era, of the books. So he kind of gave me a little bit of a test as to, whether the scenes were accurate, everything was authentic to the era, because
Hmm.
these are historical novels.
Right, right,
And
right.
yeah, so he heard every chapter as I wrote them, and he was kind of an accountability partner as well. Um, Fortunately, he was able to hear everything to the end. He passed away before the books were published, but he was able to hear the full story. And um, yeah, so that's kind of how the book came together.
Okay. Well, I did a little bit of reading on your website about what these books are about. I'm sure that people watching this video right now would love to hear about the content of this book. So let's start with the first one, the beginning. Tell me about that book.
Well, not to tell too much because I want people to read it, but it's certainly a book about two brothers born in the early 1900s. They incur a lot of trauma in their earlier years. And so it's really about how each brother navigates through that trauma differently. They both want to achieve some success, um, but they go about it in different ways and process that trauma in different ways. One ends up being successful, the other does quite the opposite. His life falls apart. Um, the basis of the trauma is, again, in how they were brought up. Their parents were first generation enslaved individuals and first generation out of enslavement, excuse me. And so the parents, as they are coming out of a different mode of living, those that trauma, that abuse that they incurred does spill into how they are raising their children. And this is a fairly typical story. That we are a product of how our parents processed their own lives. And sometimes the legacy of their emotional um, navigations impact how we grow up and how we live. So again, it's how the parents are processing their former enslavement impacts these two brothers and how they choose to move forward in life. And
Okay.
again, one manages to move past it, the other not much, not so much so.
Yeah, I can understand that. Well, the Black American history is very much part of America, and I mean, I'm a Canadian, and I don't see a reason to disqualify the stories that you're mentioning. However, today's climate may have differing views. Do your books get political in any way at all?
No, they don't. They absolutely don't.
Okay,
And here's maybe where the second one does touch a little bit, and let's talk about the second one.
sure.
So the first one goes from the early 1900s to 1930, the Depression here in the United States. And then the second book picks up in the 1960s, which is the era of, when civil rights became, prevalent, and a lot of the discriminatory types of laws started falling apart, and laws were created to make sure that everyone was indeed treated equal. So yes, during that era, there were political pushes to alter, the way that certain races were discriminated against. So the book does touch on that, and the reason it touches on that is because the two brothers are now in their 60s, and their children are, young adults and are navigating some of those things. The second book touches on the Vietnam War. It touches on, again, the civil rights and some of the prominent issues that were going on around that time and desegregation of schools. But that's not the prominent theme of the book. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the scenes that I talk about in my book, I wanted them to be very authentic to what was going on at the time.
Yeah.
And that's what a good historical novel is about.
Wow.
You can't dismiss the fact that certain social issues exist within a particular era when you're a writer. You have to acknowledge that so that your books will be true to the era that you're writing about. Another example,
Hmm.
a non-political example, in the first book, one of the brothers becomes a coal miner. I had to do a lot of research around the coal mining industry in the mid 1900s.
Sure.
There were riots, there were killings, the safety issues were horrific during that time. And so I had to learn about that and write about those conditions in the coal mines. It was horrific how the conditions that the coal miners had to deal with. Um, the dust that they were inhaling.
Yeah.
The coal mines weren't necessarily supported properly, so there were a number of blasts and
David.
coal mines caved in. So again, the books are very authentic to what was going on during that era.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, researching for when one is writing fiction, and if it happens to be historical fiction, can be a lot of fun and maybe take some time. You did some reading and you learned a lot along the way. And learning, I'm a forever student. I don't know, sounds like you probably feel the same way about yourself.
I am actually, one of my mantras is, be a lifelong learner.
Yeah.
Because, the world is always changing. There's always something new to learn. And we can never feel that we know enough. And that's what the world is about. The world is very fluid.
Hmm.
And we can't be stagnant. We can't allow um, our development to become stagnant, no matter how old we are.
Hmm.
There's always something new to learn.
Yeah.
I agree with you. And that's why I enjoy teaching, John,
Oh, yeah, of
because
course.
even though I'm teaching young people, I have to learn
Mhm.
myself in order to teach, right?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'm 67 years old. I was 7 years old when I became aware of the civil rights movement, and I saw it on TV, and I was confused. I didn't know what I was looking at. The iconic images of,
Yes.
I had to ask my father what's going on. And we were Hungarian refugees, so we weren't even from this country. And my parents went through difficulties in Hungary. They were both caught trying to escape the country in 1951. They were sent to prison. And then when the revolution broke out in 56, they took a chance. My mother was pregnant with me, and out they came, and we ended up here. So my father did his best to try and explain something that he even didn't quite fully understand. And ever since then, my whole worldview has been changed. And I despise any form of bigotry. And there's no question your books must contain some mention of racism. How did you deal with that?
And you're right, because it was the reality of that time, whether it was in the early 1900s, we talked about enslavement, and
Yeah.
then in the 60s with the civil rights. So, yes, it touches on racism. And, for me, it was quite sad because I didn't set out to write about it. I didn't set out to write, about discrimination at all. But that was a part of the era, that was a part of real life. This is a multicultural book, but that was a part of life for the Black characters and the white characters as well. You will also see an interracial relationship, love relationship
Yeah.
in the book
Mm.
that, had to be dealt with because that was not a popular thing. It was kind of a discouraged thing.
Yeah.
So I deal with it honestly. When I was writing about it, though, it made me feel very sad that the characters, and even thinking further, my ancestors, had to deal with that type of harsh treatment.
Wow.
But again, that's the reality of the era. So I did have to write about it. And in the 60s, one of the dynamics that plays out is the two generations think about racism in different ways and how to deal with it. So when the brothers were growing up, they learned one way of dealing with racism. Their children, born in a different era,
Hmm.
deal with race and racism in a different way. And they talk about how the two generations
Hmm.
approach the issue
Yeah.
differently. And I even think about my children. They grew up in a different era, and so they think about it a little bit differently than I do. So each generation is different. And that intergenerational socialization differences is another theme. So the books have several different themes, and I
Hmm.
think it's something for almost everyone.
Great.
Besides racism and, a smattering of politics, it deals with abuse, it deals with alcoholism, it deals with trauma, it deals with mental illness. So if you let's just take mental illness, for example. We deal with mental illness different today than back in the early 1900s, even different from, the 1950s and 60s. So you and I are the same age, believe it or not. And so I understand exactly what you were talking about. When I was growing up, mental illness was very much hidden. If you had a relative in your family with the mental illness, typically you didn't talk about it. It wasn't understood. Now, thank goodness, we acknowledge it. We allow people to get help. It's not shunned. We understand a lot more about it. But you will see how the mental illness is dealt with differently across the generations as well.
You mentioned before that, you were just being real. You're expressing what was going on. You did your research and you wrote your books. It's not about racism. It's about reality. And even though it's fiction, it's historical fiction in a sense. But some people, there's voices who want to ignore that and say, no, no, we should just whitewash it all. And, it didn't happen. And why keep talking about it all the time? It doesn't sound like you're talking about it all the time. You're just saying, these two brothers and their lives went different directions for various reasons. And there was some racism that was there because that's just part of the American history. What do you have to say to the voices who would rather just say, "Oh, stop talking about this. Don't put stuff like that in your book. Just write about two brothers and forget about everything else."
Um, then, then that wouldn't be very historical, would it?
No, it wouldn't be.
No, no. And so I'm not out to write fantasy. To
Hmm.
me, that would be fantasy.
Yeah.
I enjoy historical fiction because I identify with it, and that's what is given to me to write about. I believe that if we try to quash history, true history, then we will never learn. We learn, and think about our own lives. We learn from our experiences.
Correct.
We don't just dismiss each day of our life, say, okay, that was yesterday, I'm going to forget yesterday, now this is a whole new day, and nothing that happened yesterday ever existed. um, you can't live life that way. That's not reality. And
Yeah.
if we are to learn, if we are to become better people, then we have to acknowledge what happened in the past. Otherwise, we are apt to repeat it.
Yeah.
And we don't want to repeat some of the horrific
Yeah.
things. We all know that what your parents, John, went through was real. It happened.
Yeah.
What my ancestors went through is real. What other people of other races and cultures went through is real. We acknowledge, even ancient history, with the Romans. We know that happened.
Yeah.
There were some horrific things that happened to establish the Roman Empire. So we can't just select, what we want to bring forth as our history. We can't only
Mhm.
focus on the positives. We have to acknowledge the negatives
Yeah.
in order to become better people.
Right. I agree. Are you hopeful?
John, I am a very optimistic person because I do see there has been progress. I will acknowledge the progress. Enslavement was, it's illegal,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
That's progress. Technology, people are able to have a better quality of life. That's progress. So I am hopeful. What I will acknowledge, though, is that it's not a straight line. There are advances and there are steps back. But I think for the most part, there's a forward momentum. We just have to remember that the basis of human existence should be loving and caring for everyone,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's this inherent tendency of us as human beings to desire power and self-preservation, sometimes at all costs.
Yeah.
And that we have to learn to temper because the overriding thought should always be love and caring. And that's how I can hang on to hope, that that will always be the prevalent emotion that we lead our lives.
Well said. I bet your books are really good. Listening to you talk like this makes me want to read your book, both of them.
Well, thank you,
You-
John. And if I could just say,
Okay.
both of them now have been recognized by various book contests. So there's some merit there, they must be pretty good reads.
Yeah, I was about to mention that you've won some awards. On your website, there's even a mention of it, but you said in the pre-chat that you have even more news concerning your awards.
Yes, yes. Well, sure. You can definitely go to my website, teresasebastian.com. We know that. But please go to the website that's interactive. On the first page, you will see all of the awards. The most recent one was announced yesterday, the American Book Fest. It's a both books are finalists for that award. And then on the website, you will also see a description of each book and the reviews by different reviewing agencies and individuals. And then I do have a section where you can learn a little bit about the characters. Some people want to know a little bit more about the mother or the brothers. So there's information there. And then I have a page where I've just done a couple of blogs and a short story. So if you want to read a little bit more um, outside of the two books, I do have a little short story about an experience that I had when I was little. It's called The Tricycle versus the Tree, or The Tree versus the Tricycle. I forgot which one came first. But it's just a short story, and it's pretty interesting.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
So, when was the first book published?
The first book was published last year, September 2023. It came out on the September 25th, which is my mother's birthday. And it took about 3 years for me to actually write, and actually both books. Here's the interesting thing. The two books kind of ran into each other. I just kept writing and writing and writing. And when I got it to the editor and started having the beta readings and the development readings, I had someone say, it ended up being very long, and they said, you really have two books here. So I broke it into the two books, and it was true. And then I realized this is really a trilogy. It's a continuation of this family. So there is one more book in the can, John, that will hopefully we'll get that book out next year, and it will be called Lost Seeds Reconciliation. So it will be kind of how the family comes full circle in terms of reconciling the traumatic beginning and reconciling some of the trauma that came over the years from the brothers and how they raised their respective families. And so the family, hopefully, if the characters tell me, the hope is that the family will come back together.
Nice, very nice. You are
Yeah.
hopeful. Wonderful. I love it.
I am always hopeful.
Yeah,
I
me too.
really am. Like I said, we've seen history, evolve, and I think we can get there as a world where we
Mhm.
realize that, we're all created equal and we should all be treated equally and we
Mhm.
should all love each other.
Absolutely.
Because if you think about it, because this world is becoming more multicultural, I think if we all go in our past, we're all made of a lot of different things. None of us are, I shouldn't say none, but more and more, we are becoming just multiracial.
Yeah,
And so, you know, we're
for sure.
we're a lot of stuff.
That's right.
Yeah.
So where can your books be bought?
They can be bought on Barnes and Noble. They can be bought on Amazon and Bookshop. And I have found how this interesting world of books works. Sometimes you can buy books on other media, but the primary places you can buy them are Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and Bookshop.
Okay. And besides
Yes.
your awards and people really loving your book, how are sales?
Sales are going relatively well. And here's the other thing I will say, you can get the book in in electronic
Oh
form,
yeah.
and also each book will have an audio version. The first book's audio is already out.
Okay.
It's been out a while, and the second book audio will be out, I think, within a month.
Okay.
So it's been recorded. I've heard it. I have given my comments on it. It's wonderful. A wonderful lady is reading the story, and oh, she is a gem. So if
Good.
you like audiobooks, I think you'll like this one.
Yeah.
And I am very pleased with the book sales, being a first time author, being a relatively new author. So I'm
Very
I'm
good.
I'm again hopeful, John.
Hmm. Well, yeah, exactly. When I lived in
Yes.
Toronto, I had to commute to work, and sometimes those drives are an hour and 20 minutes sometimes. So I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I don't do now because I don't work. Well, I do this, but yeah, audiobooks are great, and I'm glad that you have got that done. You had someone else read it for you. Some people read their own, but what company did you employ to do that?
I did hybrid publishing, so the publisher that I was working with reached out to the company that they usually work with
Okay. Yeah.
for audiobooks. So I can't tell you exactly where they found the person, but from my end of things, what they would do is they would go out, they would get some auditions, they would send me the audition tapes of 5 different readers, and I would select the person that I thought,
Yeah.
reflected what I was looking for. And, and that's how it worked. So I
Sure.
really can't tell you where
Yeah.
they
Well, that's
where they
okay.
got the talent. Yeah.
It sounds like you had a good team working with you.
I did. And for people who are writing books, I found doing it the way that I went about it very helpful. I thought about doing just my own publishing, but then I realized this is a very daunting process. This is new for me. And if I'm going to try to, be successful at it, I know when to learn to step back and learn. And that's something you and I talked about,
Yeah.
being lifelong learners.
Yeah.
So I brought in people that knew something about book publishing and did what's called hybrid publishing.
Yeah.
So as a lawyer, I created my own publishing company and partnered with another company. And so they did the heavy lifting, they did the logistics, they did all of those technical things to get a book out there. And, we partnered on some of the major decision making. They went out there and made sure that all the printing got done,
Yeah.
the artwork and things such as that. And I just sat back and they would tell me when I needed to make a decision. I delivered the product.
Hmm.
They did the copywriting and all of that and brought the book to market.
Sure. Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm glad that we're covering this right here because one of the problems some authors who just well, I'm one of those people who self-publishes, but then after that don't know what to do. It's important to surround yourself with good people. However, we do live in a world where there's not good people and kind of scam artists, and
Mhm.
I fell prey to one of those who said they're going to put my put my books in a sort of a mock-up, mock-up book, so you get some nice images. And I discovered that I could do it myself on Photoshop better than that person. I ended up losing $80 US, which is a lot of money for me. So, but
Mhm.
you are went and found the right company, and that I think is very important because I find people like you who do partner with a reputable company go further. I would say that probably your awards came as a result of getting this book into people's hands, and that it's voted to be a really good book.
Yes, and here's what I will tell you, John, in all honesty. The editor, KAA Associates, Kevin Anderson Associates, they referred me to this to Girl Friday Productions, which is the company I partnered with. And it's important to get those referrals
Yeah.
because I found the editor through the network of my university.
Okay.
So having a reputable reference to an editing firm, and then the editing firm referring me to to the publishing
Yes.
company,
Yeah.
and also the editing firm referring me to, promoters and the production company referring me to, they had a marketing people within their shop. So yes, referrals, making sure that you are working with reputable people, especially when you don't know what you're
Exactly.
doing. Referrals are important, just like you want a
Absolutely.
referral to a physician or a dentist or,
Yes.
a barber, whatever it is, you
Hmm.
want those referrals because you can waste money. There are some people out there that just are not um, reputable.
Yeah. So I'm glad you found your way through that, and I encourage authors, if they have the money to spend, to do the research and find the correct people. You had some good references, and you're fortunate for that, and you were able to weigh out, the bad from the good. And I encourage authors that after they finish writing the book, which they thought that was the hard part, no, the hard part follows after that, right? It seems like
Mhm.
writing the book is easy.
I will tell you just one very quick story, and
Okay.
know we're running out of time, but I had a friend who wrote a wonderful story, and she handed the story over to someone that she really didn't know who said, I will read this, let me read this. Well, they actually took her book idea and wrote a version of her book. And she didn't have, the wherewithal financially to take legal action against this person. So the long and short of it is make sure that you understand how to protect your work, your intellectual property, and don't just put your manuscript in anyone's hands.
Wow. Yeah, I guess things like that do happen. Shit.
They do.
Well, I hope she learned. Is she writing more books, this person that you know?
Yes, she did.
Okay.
Yes, she
So she
did.
learned her lesson the hard way, I guess. Hmm.
Unfortunately,
Unfortunately,
yes.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, how about giving us a pitch for these two books? I'll put you full frame again, and you can tell the people why they should buy it and what makes it a good read, and remind them where they can pick it up.
Yes. So please, it's a trilogy. The first book is Lost Seeds, the beginning. And then the second book is Lost Seeds, The Legacy. They are both out there on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. They follow the lives of the Briscoe brothers, Tim and Dub, and how they navigate the world and move past the trauma of their beginnings, but also how some of their trauma visits upon their offspring. And you will read how that all evolves. So please pick up the books. They're available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and bookshop.org. And I am sure you will enjoy them because they are already award-winning novels. And thank you for listening.
Okay, excellent. Now, when you write your third book, you're always welcome back here. I love repeat guests. So, look me up next year and keep this in mind, and we'll do this all over again. I'm looking forward to talking to you again.
Thank you, John, and thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you for being a guest. You take care now. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, and if you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then I invite you to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and even leave a comment if you wish. And if you are an author, I would sure love to hear from you. Until such time, keep on writing, and remember to be kind to one another.